Hey there, it's Juju, and it's day 366 of this administration. Are you an activist? So, this was a question that was asked on Martin Luther King Day in 2019. So, 7 years ago, I was in a crowded auditorium, the London Nelson Center Community Center. And the question was asked by one of the speakers. I was at a program after I'd marched. It might have been my first march with Martin Luther King Day. And everyone around me stood up, and I stayed seated because I did not consider myself an activist. And the reason I didn't consider myself an activist was I had a very negative connotation of what it meant to be an activist. Had a friend who was an activist at that time, a very strong activist, was always getting arrested, was very aggressive and shrill in her approach. And I'd seen UCSC students closing down the highways and making people late for work. And so I had a pretty negative view of what it meant to be an activist. And this was in 2019. This is going to be a bit of a long story. So I then ended up in 2020. It was 2020 because I then flew to Selma, Alabama with a group that was going to be trained in Kingian nonviolence. There's a 5-day training, which I wasn't interested in. I wasn't even really interested in the 2-day training, but I did want to go to the crossing of the Selma Bridge, and I did want to go to Birmingham and to Montgomery and see the Monument for Peace and Freedom and the museum there. So I took 2 days of the training, and then I was able to visit the area. And then I did the first day of the march from Selma to Montgomery. And on that day, there were some Buddhists that walk every year from Selma to Montgomery. And they said, "Oh, you must have heard of Kazu Haga, you know?" And I said, "No, I haven't heard of him." And well, his latest book at that time, 5 years ago, now 6, was Healing Resistance. And it was about Kingian nonviolence. So I said, and I'd heard about that book from other people in the training, and it's like, I should really read that book. So I got that book, and I tried to set up a book club where we would talk, the people in the training would talk about it and keep up with our training. At that time, I thought nonviolence training was going to be about how you sat in a circle and held hands and, ended up getting things sprayed in your eyes. And, it was more about the physical resistance rather than the philosophy of resistance and a way of life. And it took 5 years. So then as we flew back, so I went on this trip it was me and 5 black men and 1 white older guy. And when we flew back, it was just the beginning of COVID. The hugs that we gave at that airport were the last hugs we had for a year and a half. And I had that book, Healing Resistance, and I never read it. Then I started getting trained to be a victim offender dialogue group facilitator in San Quentin prison. That was a 5-day training. Then George Floyd happened, and I became involved in anti-racism work. And then I started volunteering in the jails with the public library. Did that for a couple of years, but then things really changed when I found Empathy in Action and started going into CTF Soledad Prison with restorative justice. I also was able to join neighborhood courts, it was called at that time. Now it's Neighborhood Justice, which is a restorative justice program through the DA's office. And as I look at the trajectory of that, how I became an activist, but I was determined to be an activist on my own terms. And at that point, I didn't have the words lead with love, but that was my intention. I was going to be an activist of love, of crossing, not of trying to cross divides, and not to be othering people, but still standing on the side of justice. And this is what Kingian nonviolence. So long story, 5 years later, I started Healing Resistance, reading that book, and it really had such an impact on me. I wasn't ready before, and Kazu Haga has spent a lot of time um, volunteering in prison and doing nonviolence, and now he has moved on to the fierce vulnerability movement, which is really interesting as well. But as I was marching yesterday for MLK, I remember that question of, are you an activist? And sitting there, it was uncomfortable to be the only one sitting amongst all these activists. And I think at this moment in time, it is so important to be an activist. And you can be an activist with love. There's lots of ways to be an activist. What's happening in Minnesota, people just following, ICE agents, following and using their, constitutional rights of free speech, and the way that they're being attacked for what is our right here. We have a right to protest, we have a right to film police officers and ICE agents, and even more so just helping people who don't have food, helping, how are you helping? And so I've been thinking about that as of yesterday, and I'm really happy that I am the activist that I am today. And I'm going to continue to follow my own conscience in terms of how I participate. And I'm not going to judge other people. I'm going to encourage people because it has given me a lot more meaning in my life. But everyone needs to do what is best for them. And not everybody can be an activist. I understand it. Certainly, my Black friends are, triggered and maybe sitting this one out. And I totally understand that too. So that's just a few thoughts to really think about. If you were in a room full of people and they said, stand up, or if you're an activist, would you stand up or stay seated? So this is Juju, unfiltered, unscripted, unedited, and lead with love.